The phone rang every morning at exactly 6:05. It was always my daughter, and she always asked the same question, Dad. Are you going hunting today? If I said yes, she immediately asked, who are you going with? How long will you be gone? If I said no, she quickly ended the call. For months I believed she was just worried about her 70-year-old father living alone. Until yesterday I lied and told her I was staying home, then quietly left the house on my own business. A few hours later, the police called me, and everything I thought I knew about my family changed forever. Thank you for choosing to spend your time here on Revenge, Dad. It means everything. Now tell me something. What country or city are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Note, some elements in this story are fictional, added for storytelling purposes. Any resemblance to real names or locations is coincidental, but the message it carries is genuinely worth hearing. The phone rang at exactly 6:05 in the morning, just like it had every single day for the past 4 months. I was already awake. At 70 years old, sleep had become something that happened to other people, younger people, people who hadn't spent the last 11 months learning how to exist in a house that used to hold 2 heartbeats and now only held 1. I was sitting in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, watching the October fog roll down from the Catskill Mountains like a slow gray tide swallowing the tree line one branch at a time. Aurora would have loved this morning. She always said fall in upstate New York was God showing off. I looked at the phone screen. Emily's name glowed in the dim kitchen light. I picked up on the second ring. Good morning, sweetheart. Dad. My daughter's voice was bright, a little too bright, the kind of cheerful that takes effort. How are you doing this morning? Still vertical, I said. That's about all I can promise at my age. She laughed, but it was short, clipped, and then came the question, the same question she'd asked every single morning since July delivered, with the same careful casualness of someone who'd practiced it in the mirror. So, Dad, are you going hunting today? I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug and stared out at the fog. My chest tightened the way it always did when she asked, not from fear, from something slower and sadder than fear. Thinking about it, I said. Why do you ask, Em? I'm just curious. The words came too fast. I worry about you going out there alone, that's all. You know how those trails get in the fall, the ground's slippery and you don't always have cell service out in those woods. I've been hunting those woods since before your mother and I were married, I said. 38 years. Never once got lost. I know, Dad, She paused. Are you going alone, or is somebody going with you, like Pete from down the road, or Jackson? There it was, the second question. It always followed the first like a shadow follows a man. Haven't decided yet, I said. And how long would you be out? Like the whole day, or just a few hours? I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen table, slowly, carefully, and I looked at the empty chair across from me. Aurora's chair. The one with the faded blue cushion she'd picked out at a craft fair in Woodstock back in 2009. I hadn't moved it, hadn't been able to. Some mornings I made her a cup of coffee out of pure muscle memory and set it in front of that chair before I caught myself. Emily, I said, keeping my voice steady. Does it matter? Of course it matters. You're my father and I love you. Is it wrong that I want to know you're safe? And here was the thing that made my throat ache. It didn't sound wrong. The words were the right words. A daughter worrying about her elderly father, living alone on 47 acres in the Catskill Mountains. There was nothing unreasonable about that on the surface. Nothing you could point to and say that right there, that's the problem. But I'd been a carpenter for 40 years. I knew the difference between a house that looked solid and a house that was rotting from the inside. You learned to feel it in the walls before you could see it, and something in these morning calls felt rotten. I'll be careful, I said. Okay. Another pause. Then, you should really think about getting one of those GPS tracker things you can wear on your wrist. So, if something happened out there, someone would know where to look. Someone, I said, meaning you, meaning anyone who cares about you, Dad. After we said our goodbyes and I set the phone down on the table, I sat there for a long time with the fog pressing against the kitchen windows and Aurora's empty chair staring back at me. My heart felt heavy and slow in my chest, like a clock that was winding down. The calls had started the week after the funeral. At first I'd been grateful Emily checking in, Emily staying connected, Emily making sure her old man wasn't dissolving into grief out here by himself. But somewhere around the 3rd or 4th week, I started noticing the pattern. She never called in the evenings, never called on weekends just to talk. Never asked if I'd eaten a real meal or watched anything good on television or gotten the gutters cleaned out before winter. She only called in the mornings, and she only ever asked about hunting. I pushed myself up from the table and walked to the kitchen window, pressing one hand against the cold glass. Out past the equipment shed, past the fence line where Aurora had planted her apple trees 20 years ago, I could see the old oak tree at the edge of the back pasture. Even in the fog, it rose up dark and enormous against the gray sky, its bare October branches reaching out like outstretched arms. Aurora used to take her books out there on summer afternoons. She'd sit with her back against the bark and read for hours. I'd bring her lemonade sometimes, and she'd look up at me with that smile, the one that made me feel like the luckiest, dumbest man alive for taking so long to find her. I never asked her why she loved that particular tree. I thought I had more time for those kinds of questions. I turned away from the window and looked at the phone on the kitchen table. My daughter called every morning to ask if I was leaving the house. Not to ask how I was sleeping, not to ask if Aurora's death still hit me like a freight train some mornings when I reached for her in the dark and found cold sheets. Not to ask if I needed company or groceries, or just someone to sit on the porch with me and watch the mountains turn. Just, are you going hunting today? Are you going alone? How long will you be gone? I'm not a man who cries easily. Aurora used to say I processed emotions the way a cast iron skillet processed heat, slow to warm up, slow to cool down, and liable to burn you if you weren't paying attention. But standing in that kitchen on that October morning, with the fog eating the mountains and my wife's coffee cup still hanging on its hook by the stove, I felt my eyes burn hot and my throat close up tight. Something was wrong. I didn't know what yet. But I knew the way you know when a structural beam is compromised, the way you know before the wall cracks, that my daughter's morning phone calls were not about love. And I had decided that morning that I was going to find out exactly what they were about. I made up my mind before the coffee went cold. Jackson Reed had called me the week before about my annual property tax filings routine stuff. The kind of paperwork that piled up every October, like the leaves in the driveway. We'd scheduled a 10 o'clock meeting at his office in Woodstock, 20 minutes down Route 212. I'd been planning to go for days. I hadn't mentioned it to Emily. This morning, I decided to keep it that way. When the phone rang at 6:05, I was already dressed. Work boots, flannel shirt, the old canvas jacket Aurora had patched at the left elbow 3 times because I refused to throw it away. I picked up on the first ring. "Morning, Em. Dad. You're up early." She sounded genuinely surprised, and that small thing, the surprise in her voice, made my stomach clench. She'd expected to catch me still half asleep, vulnerable, easier to read. "Couldn't sleep," I said, which was true enough. "How are you feeling? Did you eat breakfast?" I almost laughed out loud. For 4 months she hadn't asked about breakfast, but here this morning, with my boots already on and my keys already in my jacket pocket, she was asking about breakfast. She knows something's different, I thought. She can hear it. "It's just some toast," I said, keeping my voice loose and easy. I've been thinking. It's supposed to get cold this week. I might just stay around the house today. Maybe fix that section of fence along the north pasture that's been giving me trouble." The pause that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds. I counted. "Oh," Emily said. That makes sense. The fence has needed work for a while." Another beat. "So, you're definitely not going out into the woods today?" "Definitely not," I said. "Going to be a slow day, just me and the fence posts." "Okay." Her voice settled into something softer, something that sounded almost like relief. "That's good, Dad. That's really good. You don't need to be out there by yourself in this cold anyway." We talked for another 3 minutes about nothing. The weather, whether I'd called the propane company to schedule a winter delivery, whether the furnace had been serviced. Normal things. But my heart was hammering the whole time, and my hand was so tight around the phone that my knuckles ached. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, with my hand pressed flat against the wall, breathing slowly, the way Aurora used to tell me to breathe when my blood pressure ran high. In through the nose, Maxwell. Out through the mouth. The world can wait 30 seconds. I grabbed my keys and walked out to the truck. Jackson Reed's office sat on Tinker Street in the middle of Woodstock, a narrow brick building, wedged between a pottery studio and a used bookstore, the kind of place that had been there so long it had become part of the town's skeleton. Jackson had been handling property law in Ulster County for 23 years. He was 61, with reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead, and the careful, measured way of speaking that came from spending 2 decades choosing words that held up in court. He met me at the door with a handshake and a look that said he'd noticed something in my face. "You look like a man who didn't sleep," he said. "I look like a man who's 70, I said. "Same thing?" He laughed and waved me inside. The office smelled like old paper and strong coffee, and there were framed survey maps on every wall, property lines, and elevation contours, the bones of this county laid out in ink. I'd always found it comforting in here, like the land itself was bearing witness. We spent 40 minutes going over the tax filings. My property assessment had gone up again. Land values in the Catskills had been climbing for 3 years straight, driven by people fleeing New York City and buying up every farmhouse and overgrown lot they could find. Jackson walked me through the numbers with his usual patience, and I signed where he told me to sign, and by 11:15, we were done. I was pulling on my jacket when Jackson looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. "Something else on your mind, Maxwell." I stopped, my hand stilled on the zipper. "What makes you say that?" "Because you've been here 40 minutes and you haven't once complained about the assessment rate," Jackson said. "You complained about it for 45 minutes last year, and the year before that. Whatever's sitting on your chest right now, it's heavier than property taxes." I stood there in the middle of his office between the survey maps and the smell of old coffee, and I thought about Aurora's empty chair and Emily's 3-second pause and Grant's voice on the phone saying if something happened to you, nobody would know. "I'll tell you about it soon," I said. "Right now, I just need to get home." Jackson nodded slowly. "Door's open," he said. "Whenever you're ready." I was 10 minutes from home when my phone rang through the truck's speakers. Unknown number, local area code. I tapped the answer button on the steering wheel. Mr. Thornfield. The voice was male professional, carrying the particular flatness of someone delivering news they had delivered before. "This is Deputy Carl Briggs with the Ulster County Sheriff's Office. Sir, I need you to return to your property as soon as possible." My foot came off the gas. "What happened?" The words scraped out of my throat like gravel. "There's been an incident at your residence, sir. We have units on scene. Are you far?" 10 minutes, I said. My voice sounded strange to me, too calm the calm of a man whose brain hadn't caught up to his body yet. "Maybe less." "Please drive carefully, Mr. Thornfield." I did not drive carefully. I pressed the accelerator to the floor and watched the speedometer climb, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so hard that the old arthritis in my right knuckle screamed, and all I could think, repeating like a skip in a record over and over, was that I had told Emily I was staying home. I had told her I wasn't going anywhere, and someone had come to my house the moment I left. The truck's tires screamed against the asphalt as I took the last curve before my driveway, and through the bare October trees I caught the first flash of blue and red lights strobing in the cold morning air. My stomach dropped straight through the floor of the cab. She knew, I thought. She knew I wasn't home. Ruth Patterson was standing at the end of my driveway with both arms wrapped around herself, her gray hair loose in the October wind. And when she saw my truck, she walked straight toward me before I'd even killed the engine. "Maxwell." Her voice cracked on my name. "Oh, Maxwell, I'm so sorry. I called them the second I saw the back door hanging open. I should have called you first. I just didn't think—" "Ruth." I caught both her hands in mine. They were ice cold and trembling. "You did exactly right. Are you okay? Did you go inside?" "Lord, no." She pressed my hands hard. "I stood right here and called 911, and then I called you, and you didn't pick up. So I called again, and—" Her eyes filled. "Aurora's things, Maxwell. They went through Aurora's things." My throat closed up so tight I couldn't answer her. Sheriff Dale Morrow met me at the front porch steps. A broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with a gray mustache and the kind of permanent squint that came from 40 years of upstate winters. We'd known each other since our kids were in Little League together. He shook my hand and held it a beat longer than necessary. "I'm sorry, Maxwell," he said. "Come take a look." The back storage shed had taken the worst of it. The padlock had been cut clean professional tool, not a crowbar, and the door hung at an angle on its hinges. Inside Aurora's boxes were everywhere. 30 years of carefully labeled storage, winter clothes, holiday decorations. Her mother's china ripped open and upended across the concrete floor. Her handwriting on those box labels, that round, careful cursive she'd used for everything, stared up at me from the wreckage. My eyes burned so hot I had to look away. In her small office off the living room, 2 of the desk drawers had been pulled out completely and set on the floor. The filing cabinet was open, the hanging folders pushed aside. A stack of old tax records and property documents that I'd kept on the corner shelf gone. TV's still here, Morrow said from behind me. Jewelry on the dresser untouched. Cash in the kitchen drawer still there. He paused. Whoever did this wasn't after valuables, Maxwell. They were looking for something specific. I know, I said. My voice came out rough and low. Morrow pulled out his notepad. We got an anonymous tip this morning. Caller said the property was unoccupied. Tip came in at approximately 10:17. He looked at me steadily. According to the timestamp, that was about 12 minutes after you would have left for Woodstock. The floor seemed to tilt under my boots. 12 minutes. Whoever called knew exactly when I left. Not approximately, not roughly. Exactly. You have any idea who might have made that call? Morrow asked. I looked at him, at his patient, careful eyes, at the notepad in his hand. Not yet, I said. Ruth appeared in the office doorway, hugging her cardigan to her chest. There's something else, she said. I didn't want to say it in front of the deputies, but Dale Maxwell and I have just a minute. Morrow studied us both, then nodded. I'll be outside. He squeezed my shoulder as he passed. Ruth waited until his boots were on the porch steps. Then she turned to me, and her expression shifted. The distress was still there, but underneath it was something else. Something careful and deliberate. I've been seeing a black SUV, she said. California plates, parked up on the North Trail access where the old logging road comes out. She watched my face. I thought it was hikers at first, but hikers don't sit in a parked car for 2 hours and then leave without ever getting out. How many times? I asked. My voice had gone very quiet. 6, maybe 7 times over the past year. She reached out and gripped my forearm. Maxwell, it started before Aurora passed. I saw it twice while she was still with us. I mentioned it to her once, and she went white as a sheet. Told me it was nothing, just an old acquaintance. But her hands were shaking when she said it. Aurora's hands shaking. Aurora who could butcher a deer and rewire a light fixture and sit with a dying neighbor through the night without flinching, shaking at the mention of a parked car. The burning behind my eyes got worse. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I managed. Ruth's chin trembled. Because she asked me not to, she whispered. She said she didn't want you to worry. Those were her exact words. I don't want Maxwell to worry. I turned away and pressed my fist against the wall and breathed. Once. Twice. I don't want Maxwell to worry. 37 years of marriage. 37 years. And she had been standing in this house carrying something that made her hands shake. And she had chosen to carry it alone, so I wouldn't have to. There's something else? Ruth said. Something I've been holding on to. But not here, not like this. She looked at the deputies moving through my kitchen, at Sheriff Morrow's notepad, at the wreckage of Aurora's storage shed, visible through the window. Come to my house when they're gone. I'll make tea. There are things I need to tell you that I don't want anyone else to hear. I looked at her, at the way she was gripping her cardigan, at the deliberate steadiness in her voice, and I understood that whatever she was carrying, she had been carrying it for a long time. I'll be there, I said. The sheriff's cruiser was the last to leave its taillights disappearing around the bend, just as the sun dropped behind the Catskills and took every last bit of warmth with it. I stood on the porch until the sound of the engine faded completely. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at nothing in particular, at the grain of the wood, at Aurora's empty chair, at the coffee mug I'd left there that morning before everything changed. Ruth's words kept coming back to me. Come to my house when they're gone. There are things I need to tell you that I don't want anyone else to hear. Whatever she was holding on to, she'd been holding it for a long time. I could see it in the way she'd gripped her cardigan, at the deliberate steadiness in her voice when she'd looked at me and said she had things to tell me that no one else should hear. Aurora's handwriting, small and careful, the letters slightly uneven the way her writing got, in her final months when the medication made her hands stiff. She had written these words while she was dying. She had pressed them into Ruth's hand and made her promise, and then she had gone into that hospital and never come back out. My chest felt like something was sitting on it, something heavy and patient that had no intention of moving. I picked up the phone and called Emily. It rang 4 times, 5. Then the line opened and it wasn't Emily's voice that came through. Hey, Dad. Grant Holloway, smooth and unhurried, like a man who had all the time in the world. Emily's in the shower. Is everything okay? Everything is okay. My son-in-law asking if everything was okay on the same day someone had broken into my home and ransacked my dead wife's belongings. There was an incident at the property today, I said. I kept my voice flat, neutral, a carpenter's voice measuring twice before cutting. Someone broke into the storage shed, went through Aurora's things. A pause. 1 beat. 2. Wow, Grant said. That's terrible. Did they take anything valuable? Did they take anything valuable? Not, are you all right? Not, do you need us to come up? Not even, my God, Dad, are you okay? Just, did they take anything valuable? Some documents, I said. Old paperwork. Huh. Another pause, and in that pause I heard something, a barely perceptible shift, like a man recalibrating. Well, that's strange. Probably kids, right? You know how it is out there in the fall, teenagers looking for somewhere to party. They see a property set back from the road. The lock was cut with a professional tool, I said. Not kids. 3 full seconds of silence. Then Grant said very carefully, "You really should think about your security situation out there, Dad. A man your age living alone on a property that size. If something happened to you, it could be hours before anyone knew. Days even." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. A man your age, living alone, if something happened to you. He wasn't asking about the break-in. He was reminding me of my vulnerability, slowly, deliberately, like a man reading from a script he'd rehearsed. "Grant," I said, "how did you know I was alone when it happened?" The briefest hesitation. "What do you mean?" "I didn't tell you I was away from the property today. I didn't tell anyone." I pressed the phone hard against my ear. "So, how did you know?" "Dad, I just assumed." "You assumed," I said. "You live alone so naturally." "Naturally," I said. The line hummed between us. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was certain he could hear it through the phone. My free hand found the edge of the kitchen table and gripped at the wood solid and cool under my palm, the one real thing in a room that had started spinning very slowly. "I think you're reading too much into this," Grant said finally. His voice had smoothed back out, controlled almost gentle the tone of a man managing a difficult conversation. "You've had a stressful day. A violation like this, it makes people paranoid. That's completely normal." Paranoid? He'd chosen that word specifically. "Tell Emily I called," I said. I hung up before he could answer. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone face down in front of me and Aurora's note beside it, and I pressed both palms flat against the wood and breathed hard and deliberate, the way a man breathes when he's trying not to come apart at the seams. I hadn't told Grant I was away from the property. I hadn't told him a single thing about my schedule, but he already knew, and he had just spent 3 minutes trying to convince me I was imagining things. I looked up at Aurora's photograph on the kitchen wall, the one from our 25th anniversary, the two of us standing in front of the old oak tree in the back pasture, her laughing at something I'd said, her head tipped back, the summer light catching the silver in her hair. "What did you know?" I whispered. "What did you know that you didn't tell me?" The photograph didn't answer, but the note on the table did. Under the oak. 1993. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark in the bedroom Aurora and I had shared for 34 years, and I stared at the ceiling and listened to the old farmhouse breathe around me, the creak of the joists, the rattle of the storm window in the spare room, the particular groan of the back porch steps that I'd been meaning to fix since 2019. Sounds I knew as well as my own heartbeat. Sounds that used to mean safety. They didn't mean safety anymore. I kept replaying the phone call with Grant. The way he'd said, "Did they take anything valuable? Not, are you all right? Not, do you need us to come up?" Just that one surgical question aimed directly at what he actually cared about. The way he'd pivoted to paranoid the moment I'd pushed back. The way he'd said, "A man your age living alone," like he was reading stage directions from a script he'd already memorized. And underneath all of it, the thing I couldn't stop turning over, I hadn't told him I was away from the property. Not today, not ever. The only person I'd spoken to that morning was Emily. At 4:30, I gave up on sleep entirely, got dressed in the dark, and sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. I didn't taste until the sky outside the window began to go gray at the edges. Then I drove to Woodstock. Jackson's office on Tinker Street didn't open until 9, but his truck was already in the lot when I pulled in at 8:15, and when I knocked, he opened the door in his shirt sleeves with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the particular expression of a man who has been up since before dawn, working on something he hasn't yet figured out how to say. "I was wondering when you'd show up," he said. "You heard? Dale Morrow called me last night." He stepped back to let me in. Come on, I've got coffee and I've got something you need to see. The office smelled the way it always did, old paper and strong coffee and the faint mineral smell of the survey maps that covered every wall, the bones of Ulster County laid out in ink. Jackson had been running searches on the ACRIS database since 6 in the morning, he told me. ACRIS, the Automated City Register Information System, was New York State's public property records database, accessible to any attorney, any title company, any member of the public who knew where to look. Jackson had been using it for 23 years. He knew exactly where to look. What he'd found had kept him at his desk until I knocked on his door. 4 months ago, he said, spreading a set of printed documents across the conference table, a limited liability company called Holloway Salinas Holdings filed an application with Ulster County to use 12 acres of your western pasture as a commercial equipment storage site. He tapped the top page with 2 fingers. The application includes your signature authorizing the land use agreement. I leaned forward and looked at the signature line, Maxwell R. Thornfield. My name, my middle initial, the signature that had authorized 47 years of tax filings and property transfers and lumber orders and equipment leases, the signature I could have produced in my sleep. I had been signing my name since I was 6 years old. I knew every quirk of it, where the pen lifted between the X and the W, the slight backward lean of the capital T, the way the field at the end of my name always ran slightly downhill, no matter how hard I tried to keep it level. None of that was here. The handwriting was too fluid, the letters pressed too evenly into the paper. It looked like my signature the way a photograph of a person looks like them, close enough to recognize, at a glance wrong in every way that mattered, if you actually knew the original. That's not my signature, I said. My voice came out harder than I intended. No, Jackson said. It isn't. He pulled out a second sheet, a side-by-side comparison he'd printed from my actual property filings going back 15 years. The difference was visible even to me, and I wasn't a document examiner. Whoever did this was good, but not good enough. Holloway Salinas, I said. The name sat in my mouth like something sour and metallic, the taste of a bad penny. Grant Holloway. That'd be my assumption. Jackson took off his reading glasses and set them carefully on the table. I made a call this morning to the FBI field office in Manhattan. Agent Diane Vance, she handles financial crimes and property fraud across the tri-state area. I worked with her 3 years ago on a boundary dispute that ended up going federal. Sharp, thorough, the kind of agent who doesn't close files until she's certain there's nothing left to find. He paused, letting that land. Turns out she already knows the name Victor Salinas. Who is he? The other half of Holloway Salinas Holdings. Grant's business partner out of Los Angeles. They've been working together in commercial real estate for about 8 years. Jackson's jaw tightened. In 2019, the FBI opened an investigation into Salinas for commercial real estate fraud, inflating property values on distressed assets, filing falsified documents to secure financing, moving money through shell entities. The investigation was serious. Vance told me they had him cold. He paused. The case fell apart when a key witness recanted 3 days before the grand jury convened. Salinas walked, but Vance never closed the file. She's been watching him ever since. The coffee in my mug had gone cold at some point while Jackson was talking. I didn't notice until I tried to drink it, and the chill hit the back of my throat like a small shock. There's something else, Jackson said quietly. He reached for the document stack and turned to the last page, sliding it across the table toward me, without a word. The signature line at the bottom of the land use application had 2 names on it. The first was mine forged. The second was listed as co-applicant's guarantor, Emily Thornfield Holloway. Her signature, her actual genuine unmistakable signature. I had watched Emily sign her name 10,000 times since she was a little girl, sitting at our kitchen table, learning cursive from Aurora's patient instruction. I knew the particular way her capital E opened wide at the top, the way her H in Holloway swung out on the downstroke, like it was reaching for something, the way the whole name tilted very slightly to the right, the same direction it had always tilted since she was 9 years old. That signature was real. The words hit me somewhere below the sternum, the way a fall hits you, not the impact itself, but the sudden terrible understanding of what just happened. My hand came up and pressed hard against my chest, because something in there had cracked quietly and completely, the way old wood cracks in winter, cold not breaking apart, just opening along a seam that had been there all along. She didn't know, I said. My voice was barely a voice. Jackson, she had no idea what she was signing. Almost certainly not, he said, and the gentleness in his voice made it worse somehow. Under New York law, this is textbook fraud in the inducement. When a party is deliberately deceived about the nature or contents of a document they're asked to sign, that signature is legally void. Emily has no liability here. The law is clear on that. He leaned forward slightly. But Grant has just added additional forgery charges to his list of problems. And those problems are getting considerable. I stared at my daughter's signature on that page for a long time. She had trusted him. She had sat across a table in their kitchen in Los Angeles. I could picture it exactly, the pale wood table she'd sent us a photo of when they moved in the window that looked out onto the courtyard, and she had signed whatever he put in front of her because he was her husband and she loved him, and that was what you did. You signed the things your husband asked you to sign. You didn't demand explanations for paperwork. He had taken that trust and folded it into a weapon and used it to try to take my land. Maxwell. Jackson's voice cut through the noise in my head, steady and deliberate. I need you to focus. Agent Vance wants to speak with you directly. But before that conversation happens, she needs to know one thing. She needs to know what Grant and Salinas were actually looking for when they sent someone into your house yesterday. Because forging documents to access 12 acres of a dead woman's husband's pasture is not the endgame here. That's infrastructure. That's preparation. He looked at me steadily. What are they preparing for? I lowered my hand from my chest. The piece of paper Ruth had pressed into my hand, still in my jacket pocket, soft with the handling of a single anxious night. Under the oak. 1993. I think I know what they're looking for, I said. My voice had steadied itself somewhere in the last 30 seconds, the way a compass steadies after you stop moving. And I think my wife knew they were coming. Jackson looked at me across the table at the documents between us, at whatever he could see in my face, and he set his reading glasses down very carefully, the way you set something down, when you understand that what comes next is going to require your full attention. Then you'd better start from the beginning, he said. Ruth Patterson's house sat a quarter-mile down the road from mine, close enough that Aurora used to walk over in her garden boots on summer afternoons, without bothering to call ahead. I'd driven past it 10,000 times without really seeing it. The white clapboard siding, the green shutters that needed repainting, the wind chimes. Aurora had helped her hang on the front porch the summer before everything went wrong. I pulled into her gravel driveway at 2:30. She was already on the porch when I got out of the truck, not sitting, standing arms crossed tight over her chest, watching me come up the path with an expression I hadn't seen on her face since Aurora's funeral, like a woman bracing for impact. I wondered how long it would take you, she said. Ruth. I stopped at the porch steps. My knees ached from the cold, and my head felt like it was full of wet sand. I need you to tell me everything, not the short version, everything. She held the screen door open and said, Come inside. I'll put the kettle on. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old wood and the particular kind of quiet that settles into a house where someone has lived alone for a long time. She moved around the counter with the efficiency of a woman who'd been making tea for difficult conversations for 7 decades, and I sat at her kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the worn formica and tried to hold myself together. It started about 8 months before she passed. Ruth said, setting 2 mugs on the table and lowering herself into the chair across from me. I noticed it because I notice everything on this road. 71 years old, and my eyes are still better than most people half my age. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Black SUV, California plates I remember, because the plate frame had a dealership name on it, one of those big Los Angeles ones. It would park up at the North Trail access right where the old logging road comes out of the tree line. How long would it stay? Hour, sometimes 2. Her jaw tightened. Always on the days you went hunting Maxwell. Always when your truck was gone. The tea burned my tongue, but I drank it anyway because I needed something to do with my hands. I mentioned it to Aurora the second time I saw it. Ruth continued, knocked on her door one afternoon, told her there was a car up on the logging road, again asked if she knew anything about it. Ruth's voice dropped. She went white, not pale white like someone had switched a light off behind her eyes. Her hand came up and grabbed my arm so hard she left marks. What did she say? She said, Don't tell Maxwell. Please, Ruth, don't say a word to Maxwell. Ruth's chin trembled. I asked her why, and she said it was nothing, just someone she used to know it would go away on its own. but her hands were shaking, Maxwell. Aurora's hands never shook. Not when she was setting a broken fence post in January frost. Not when she was sitting with my sister through her last night. That woman had the steadiest hands I ever saw. Ruth pressed her fingers hard against her lips, and they were shaking. My throat had closed up completely. I managed to say, "She never told me. She was protecting you." Ruth said it simply the way you state a fact about weather or gravity. That was Aurora's way. She'd carry a burning coal in her bare hands before she'd hand it to someone she loved. I stood up abruptly and walked to Ruth's kitchen window because I could not sit still with that image in my head. Aurora at her own kitchen table watching that black SUV through the window, keeping it locked inside her chest for 8 months while it burned. Outside, the October light was going gold and thin over the fields. Somewhere beyond my tree line, the old oak stood in the back pasture. I could just make out its crown above the fence. "She gave you something," I said, "before she went into the hospital the last time." Ruth made a sound behind me, not quite a word, more like the sound a person makes when they've been holding something for too long and finally set it down. "The morning they came for her," Ruth said, and her voice cracked open like green wood. "She walked over here herself. Wouldn't let you drive her? She said she needed 5 minutes of fresh air before being cooped up in that hospital. She came to my door and she hugged me for a long time, and then she pressed that piece of paper into my hand, and she said—" Ruth stopped, took a breath that shuddered all the way down. She said, "If I don't come home, give this to Maxwell. He'll know what it means. And Ruth, make sure he's ready before you give it to him." I turned around. Ruth was crying. Not delicately, her whole face was crumpled with it, her shoulders shaking, tears running freely down her cheeks and dropping off her jaw. She didn't try to stop them or wipe them away. She just sat there and let herself grieve the way people do when they've been holding something back for almost a year. "She knew she wasn't coming home," Ruth whispered. "She knew Maxwell, and she still walked over here in her garden boots to make sure you'd be taken care of." My legs stopped working properly. I grabbed the back of the kitchen chair and held on my knuckles, going white, my chest heaving with something I hadn't let myself feel since the night Aurora died, something enormous and shapeless and devastating that had been sitting behind my sternum for 11 months waiting. I did not let it out. Not yet. There was still too much I needed to do, but God, it wanted out. "The paper she gave you," I said. My voice was barely a voice. "You still have it." Ruth opened the drawer beside her and took out a small folded square, soft with handling, the creases gone dark. She held it out across the table. I took it with a hand that shook so badly I nearly dropped it. 4 words, 1 number. Aurora's handwriting, small and careful and unmistakably hers. "Under the oak, 1993. I stared at those words until they blurred. 31 years. She had been carrying this for 31 years, and she had walked it over to Ruth's house in her garden boots on the last morning of her life, and she had made sure I would find it after she was gone. "What does it mean?" Ruth asked softly. "The oak tree, do you know?" I folded the paper and held it against my chest. "I think I'm about to find out," I said. "Before I open that locked box and show you what Aurora hid inside for 30 years, drop the number 7 in the comments to let me know you're still here with me. I read every single one, and knowing you're there means everything on Revenge Dad. Just a reminder, this story contains fictional elements woven in for depth and meaning. If that's not your thing, no judgment, you can step away here. But if you're staying, what comes next will change everything you thought you knew." I drove home with the windows down despite the cold. I needed the air. I needed something sharp and real against my face to keep me from pulling over on the side of Route 212 and coming apart completely. The October wind off the Catskills was exactly what I needed, brutal and clean smelling of wood smoke and dying leaves, and the particular cold that settles into these mountains in the weeks before the first frost. By the time I turned up my driveway, I had made a decision. I was going into Aurora's room. I hadn't been in there. Not really. I'd stood in the doorway a few times in the first weeks after she died, stood there with my hand on the doorframe, like a man standing at the edge of something he couldn't cross, and then walked away. I'd kept the door closed since October of last year, nearly 12 months. The room still smelled like her. That was the thing that hit me first when I pushed the door open. Her face, creamed the cedar sachets she kept in the closet, the faint trace of the lavender soap she'd ordered from a small shop in Vermont every Christmas for 30 years. It was so specifically, unmistakably her that my knees buckled and I had to catch myself on the doorframe with both hands. Aurora. I said out loud to the empty room and the last of the daylight coming through her curtains. I need your help, sweetheart. The room didn't answer, but I hadn't really expected it to. I went to the walnut dresser first, then the closet, then the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Nothing. I pulled every drawer, checked every shelf, ran my hands along the top of the closet where she used to hide Christmas presents. Nothing. Then I remembered the cabinet. It was a piece I'd built for her myself, back in the spring of 1998. A tall oak cabinet for her office with 3 regular drawers and a 4th that she'd asked me to make with a false back. She'd been specific about it. A teak panel fitted flush held in place with 2 small pressure catches on the inside. You had to know exactly where to press. At the time, she'd said she wanted somewhere to keep important documents safe. I'd built it without asking questions the way you do when you've been married long enough to know that some requests don't need explaining. I'd built it, I'd installed it, and then I'd forgotten about it for 26 years. I crossed the hallway to her small office, went straight to the cabinet in the corner, and crouched in front of the bottom drawer. My knees screamed at me. I ignored them. I pulled the drawer all the way out, set it on the floor, reached into the empty cavity, found the seam of the teak panel with my fingertips pressed, both pressure catches simultaneously. The panel swung inward. My breath left my body in one long, shaking exhale. Behind the panel was a steel lockbox gray about the size of a shoebox with a combination dial on the front. Sitting on top of it was a small key on a length of thin chain. I recognized the key immediately. It had hung around Aurora's neck on that chain for as long as I could remember. I'd assumed it was sentimental, the key to her mother's house maybe, or something from her childhood. I had never asked. The combination was our anniversary. I knew it before I even tried it. June 14th, 1987, 6/14/87. The lock clicked open on the first attempt, and the sound of it, that small definitive click, felt like something ending and something beginning at the same time. Inside the box, a brown leather notebook soft with age, the spine cracked from use, a sealed envelope with Emily's name on the front in Aurora's handwriting, a folded note with my name on it. I picked up my note first. My hands were trembling so badly that I had to press the paper against my knee to hold it still enough to read. Maxwell, I'm sorry I never told you. I was afraid, and being afraid made me selfish, and my selfishness put you in danger without your knowledge or your consent. That is the thing I am most ashamed of. Everything you need to understand is in the notebook. The rest of the proof is under the oak where I put it in the spring of 2019. I chose that spot because it's where you proposed to me, and I thought if something happened to me, you would eventually go back there and feel me close to you. I love you. I have loved you every day of this marriage, including the days I was too afraid to tell you the truth. Don't forgive me until you've read the notebook. Then decide. Aurora. I sat on the floor of her office with my back against the cabinet and my wife's note in my hands, and I wept. Not quietly, I am not a man who cries quietly, and there was no one there to hear me anyway. I pressed the heel of my hand against my mouth and wept until my shoulders shook and my eyes swelled, and the words on the note blurred into nothing. She had proposed the spot herself, where you proposed to me. I had dropped down on one knee in the mud under that oak tree on a cold April evening in 1986 with a ring I'd saved 11 months to buy, and she had laughed so hard she'd cried, and then she'd said yes, and I had thought in that moment that I was the luckiest man who had ever lived. She had buried the truth of her life in the most sacred ground we had. When the worst of it passed, I wiped my face with the back of my hand, picked up the leather notebook, and opened it. The first entry was dated January 1993, Los Angeles, California. I have been keeping these records for 3 months. I don't know yet what I'm going to do with them. What I know is that what Nathaniel Cross is doing is wrong, and that I am the only person in a position to prove it, and that if I don't write it down, it will disappear the way these things always disappear quietly with money, without consequence. I am a 29-year-old accountant from Sacramento. I am not brave, but I am very good with numbers. And the numbers don't lie. I turn the page, and then another, and another. By the time I reached the middle of the notebook, the room had gone completely dark around me, and I hadn't noticed, and I didn't care, because what I was reading had rewritten the story of my own life. The ranch, the down payment, the life Aurora and I had built together from what I'd believed were calloused hands and borrowed hope, and I needed to understand every word of it before I could take a single step forward. The last regular entry was dated October 1993. I am leaving Los Angeles on Friday. Maxwell doesn't know why. Not really. I told him I wanted a quieter life, that the city was suffocating me, which is true enough. What I haven't told him is that I am terrified. What I haven't told him is that I have made a copy of everything and I am taking it with me. What I haven't told him is that the man I used to work for is not the kind of man who lets things go. I pray I am wrong about that. I closed the notebook. She hadn't been wrong. I sat in the dark of Aurora's office for a long time, holding the notebook against my chest, feeling the weight of 31 years pressing down on me from every direction. Then, I reached into the box and picked up the sealed envelope addressed to Emily. I held it for a long moment. Then, I set it aside, unopened. It wasn't mine to read. Not yet. I picked up my phone and called Jackson. He answered on the second ring. I found it, I said. I found what she left. Jackson, I need you to hear all of it, and then I need you to tell me what we do next. Jackson arrived at 9:15 with a paper bag from the diner on Mill Hill Road, 2 coffees and a pair of egg sandwiches wrapped in foil that had gone cold on the drive over. He set them on Aurora's kitchen table without ceremony and sat down across from me and looked at the notebook and the open lockbox and my face and said nothing about any of it except, start wherever you need to start. So, I started at the beginning. I talked for almost an hour. I told him about the notebook, about cross-logistics, about the money Aurora had watched, move through shell accounts and dummy invoices in the early 90s, about the meticulous records she'd kept in her small accountant's hand column after column of figures that told a story no legitimate business could explain. I told him about her last entry in October 1993, the one about leaving Los Angeles on a Friday with copies of everything and a terror she'd never named out loud to anyone, least of all me. Jackson listened without interrupting. He was good at that. The particular stillness of a man who understood that some information needed to be delivered whole before it could be examined in pieces. When I finished, he picked up his coffee, found it cold, drank it anyway. There's more, I said. In the notebook, toward the back. He looked at me carefully. About Grant. About Grant. I opened the notebook to the last section pages Aurora had added years after the original entries, the handwriting slightly different, the ink darker written in the months before she got sick. I turned it so Jackson could read. The first of these later entries was dated 4 years ago, spring the year Grant and Emily had come up for Easter weekend. Grant asked me today about the property deeds. He was very casual about it. We were doing the dishes after dinner. Emily was outside with Maxwell looking at the horses, and he said as if it were nothing, "Aurora, do you know offhand what the land is assessed at these days? Just curious. Real estate values up here have really taken off." I told him I didn't know offhand. He said it must be worth quite a bit. 47 acres in the Catskills with the timber rights and the water access. That's a serious asset. I said, "It's Maxwell's home. It's not an asset." He smiled at me. It was a perfectly pleasant smile. That was what frightened me most about it. Jackson looked up from the notebook. His jaw was set hard. "Keep reading," I said. The next entry 8 months later. Grant came up alone today. Maxwell was hunting the 3-day trip he does every November up past the ridge. Grant said he was passing through on his way to visit a college friend in Albany and thought he'd stop in. I did not believe him. A man does not drive 4 hours out of his way to stop in. He asked if I'd had a chance to look into the property assessment. I said I had not. He asked if Maxwell had ever thought about putting the land in a family trust for estate planning purposes. He said he knew a very good attorney in Los Angeles who handled rural property portfolios. I told him Maxwell handled his own affairs. He asked very gently if Maxwell had ever mentioned anything about documents Aurora might have kept from her time in California. I felt the room go cold. He knows I wrote at the bottom of that entry, the handwriting pressed hard into the page. He knows something. Not everything, but something. And whoever told him sent him to me, first not Maxwell, which means they think I am the easier target. They are wrong, but I cannot let Maxwell know. If Maxwell knows, he will confront Grant directly. If Maxwell confronts Grant, Grant will run back to whoever sent him, and then we will have lost our only advantage, which is that they do not know what I kept and where I put it. I need time. I need to think. I had to stop reading then because my vision had gone blurry and my hands had started shaking again. Not the fine tremor of cold or age, but the deep whole-body shaking of a man who was only now understanding the full dimensions of what his wife had been living with. She was protecting the investigation, Jackson said quietly. She wasn't just protecting you, she was protecting the evidence. She knew if you confronted Grant Cross would find out the documents still existed and move to destroy them. She was playing a longer game than any of us knew, I said. My voice came out raw and scraped. She was. Jackson closed the notebook carefully with both hands, the way you close something that deserves respect. Maxwell, this woman, was running a 30-year operation to preserve evidence against a federal criminal alone, without backup, without anyone knowing, while raising a daughter and running a household and loving you. He shook his head slowly. I don't say this lightly. Aurora Thornfield was one of the most remarkable people I have ever had the privilege of knowing. Something broke open in my chest when he said that. Not painfully, more like a window being pushed up after a long winter letting air into a room that had been sealed too long. My eyes filled and spilled over, and I let them sitting at my own kitchen table at 10 o'clock at night with Jackson Reed across from me and my wife's notebook between us. She wrote something else, I managed. At the very end, one more entry, dated 6 months before she died. Jackson didn't speak. He waited. I turned to the last page and read it aloud because I couldn't bear to read it again. Alone in my head, I have been told the cancer is moving faster than they expected. Dr. Mercer was kind about it, the way good doctors are kind, honest but gentle, giving me the shape of the truth without making me carry more of the weight than necessary. I have perhaps 8 months, perhaps less. There are things I need to do. First, I am going to the FBI field office in Manhattan next Tuesday, not to report. Not yet. I am going to find out the name of the right person to send the evidence to the person who will actually know what to do with it. I will prepare a package. I will seal it. I will keep it in the box under the oak with the rest. Second, I need to write to Emily. There are things she needs to know about the man she married that I have not had the courage to say out loud. I will write them down instead. I am better on paper anyway. Third, Maxwell. I cannot tell him. I have tried to find the words 100 times. And they do not come because there are no good words for it. I brought something dangerous into your life, and I have been keeping it from you for 30 years, because I love you, and I was afraid, and I did not want you to think less of me. But I am going to leave him a trail, breadcrumbs the way they do in the old stories, small enough that he won't find them until he needs to, specific enough that when he does, he will know exactly where to look. He will be angry. He has a right to be angry. But he will also understand. Maxwell has always understood things eventually. It is one of the reasons I fell in love with him. It is one of the reasons I am not afraid to leave this in his hands. I stopped reading. The kitchen was very quiet, the old refrigerator humming, the wind moving through the oak, out back the clock on the wall, ticking forward into a night that felt like it would never end. Jackson reached across the table and put his hand over mine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. After a long moment, I straightened in my chair, pulled my hand back, and pressed both palms flat on the table. She went to the FBI, I said, which means there's a name, someone she trusted enough to address that package to. Agent Diane Vance, Jackson said. I'd bet my license on it. Then that's who we call in the morning, I said, and then we figure out how to give Grant exactly what he's looking for. Agent Diane Vance drove up from Manhattan in a gray government sedan that she parked with military precision in Jackson's lot at exactly 10:45 the following morning. She was somewhere in her mid-40s, compact and straight-shouldered, with short dark hair and the kind of eyes that cataloged a room in the time it took most people to find a chair. She wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt, no jewelry, sensible shoes. And she shook my hand with a grip that told me she had been underestimated by larger people than me and had made them regret it. Mr. Thornfield, she said, I've been hoping to meet you for about 2 years. You knew Aurora, I asked. I knew of her. She sat down across from me at Jackson's conference table, set a manila folder in front of her, and folded her hands on top of it. Your wife contacted the Manhattan field office 14 months ago. She asked to speak specifically with the agent handling long-term financial crimes cases involving West Coast logistics companies. Vance's voice was measured and precise, each word placed deliberately, like someone who had learned early that careless language caused problems. That was me. We met twice, once in the city, once up here in Woodstock, at a coffee shop on Tinker Street. She gave me a summary of what she had and where it was. She told me she was sick. She told me she didn't know how much time she had, but that she was going to make sure the evidence was accessible when the time came. My throat tightened. Aurora had sat in a coffee shop on Tinker Street with an FBI agent while I was 30 miles away at the hardware store buying fence posts, and I had known nothing about it. She asked me to wait, Vance continued. She said there were things she needed to arrange first, things that had nothing to do with the investigation. Personal things? Vance looked at me steadily. I believe she meant you, Mr. Thornfield. She wanted to make sure you were going to be all right before she set this in motion. The room felt very small suddenly. Jackson cleared his throat. Agent Vance, what can you tell us about Nathaniel Cross? Vance opened her manila folder. Nathaniel Cross, 72 years old, currently residing in Beverly Hills. Founder and former CEO of Cross Logistics International, a freight and transportation company headquartered in Los Angeles. The company was dissolved in 2001, but its subsidiary networks operated under different names for another decade. She slid a photograph across the table, a man with silver hair and a jaw like a cliff face photographed coming out of what looked like a courthouse. Between 1990 and 1994, our financial crimes unit estimates that Cross moved approximately $14 million through his logistics network using a money laundering scheme. Shell companies falsified freight invoices and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Luxembourg. Aurora documented all of it, I said. She documented enough of it, Vance said carefully. What she brought me 14 months ago were copy-scanned versions of the original records, admissible as corroborating evidence but not sufficient on their own for federal prosecution. What we need are the originals. She looked at me. Which, according to your wife, are in a waterproof steel container buried under a specific tree on your property. Under the oak, I said. Yes. Cross has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, Vance said. His doctors give him 4 to 6 months. He knows the originals exist. He knows Aurora kept them. And he is running out of time to make them disappear. She paused. That is why Grant Holloway showed up. Cross reached out to him approximately 2 years ago through an intermediary attorney in Los Angeles. He needed someone with access to your family, someone who could find out what Aurora left and where she put it without triggering an investigation. He used my daughter, I said. The words came out flat and hard. He used your son-in-law, Vance corrected gently but precisely. Emily was a means of access. Grant was the operative. She closed the folder. Mr. Thornfield, I want to be direct with you. We can arrest Grant Holloway today for the forged property documents alone. Jackson has more than enough for a fraud charge. But if we do that now, Cross will know immediately that we're onto him. He'll destroy whatever copies he has, disappear his remaining assets, and we will never touch him. She leaned forward. However, if we give Grant the opportunity to come to your property and retrieve the box himself, and we document that retrieval, we have Grant on. Breaking and entering, theft and conspiracy. We have his communications with Cross. We have the chain of evidence connecting Cross directly to the original crimes. She looked at me steadily. We get all of them, or we get one of them. That's your choice to make, Mr. Thornfield. It's your property and your family. I sat with that for a moment. Outside Jackson's window, Woodstock was going about its Tuesday morning, a delivery truck rumbling down Tinker Street, a woman walking a yellow Labrador past the bookstore, 2 men in paint-stained coveralls drinking coffee on a tailgate. The ordinary world, indifferent and continuous, rolling forward the way it always did, whether you were ready for it or not. What do we need to do? I asked. Vance nodded as if she'd expected that answer. You call your daughter today. You tell her you're going hunting this Friday, 3 days the way you usually do. You go through your normal routine exactly as you always have. You pack a bag, you load your truck, you drive away from the property. And then you don't go hunting, Vance said. You come here to Jackson's office. You stay off your property entirely. Sheriff Morrow will have 2 units positioned on the county road, far enough back that Grant won't see them on his way in. My team will be in the tree line on the eastern edge of your property from Friday night forward. She paused. When Grant goes for the box, we'll have him on camera, on audio, and in person. There will be no ambiguity about what he was there to do. I thought about Emily, about calling her and saying the words, I'm going hunting Friday 3 days, and knowing that within an hour she would tell Grant and Grant would start making plans, and the whole machinery of betrayal would begin moving again, this time toward its end. What about Emily? I asked. When this is over, What happens to her? Vance's expression didn't soften exactly, but something in it shifted, became less official, more human. If she cooperates fully with our investigation, and if her involvement was limited to what you've described, an unwitting participant who was manipulated by her husband, the U.S. Attorney's Office has significant discretion in how they proceed. She met my eyes. I can't make you promises, Mr. Thornfield, but I can tell you that we're not in the business of prosecuting people for trusting the wrong person. I nodded. I picked up my phone. Emily answered on the second ring, bright and a little breathless the way she always was, in the late morning, probably between meetings. Dad, I was just thinking about you. How are you doing? I'm all right, sweetheart. I kept my voice easy and warm, the way it always was, the way she expected it to be. Listen, I'm thinking about going out for a few days this week, hunting up past the ridge, probably Friday through Sunday. A pause, one beat, two. Oh, she said. Okay, Dad, that sounds good. You should get out there before the season ends. She didn't ask who I was going with. She didn't ask how long I'd be gone or whether anyone would know where I was. Not a single one of the questions she'd been asking every morning for 4 months. She already knew the answers she needed. After we hung up, I set the phone face down on Jackson's conference table. My chest felt hollowed out and heavy, at the same time the way a drum feels empty in the middle, dense at the edges. She'll tell him within the hour, Vance said. Not unkindly, just factually. I know, I said. Jackson reached over and pushed the cold coffee toward me. I drank it without tasting it and stared at the survey maps on the wall and thought about a young woman in Sacramento who had been very good with numbers and very brave in the ways that don't look like bravery from the outside and very much alone with the weight of what she knew. It is one of the reasons I am not afraid to leave this in his hands. I was not going to let her down. Friday morning, I packed a hunting bag, the way I always packed it. The orange vest, the wool socks, the thermos Aurora used to fill with black coffee, and a splash of bourbon on cold mornings. I packed it the way a man packs when he intends to use it, because I didn't know who might be watching the driveway, and the performance had to be complete. I loaded the bag into the truck bed at 6:15. I let the engine warm up for 5 minutes the way I always did. I drove down my driveway at 6:20, turned left onto the county road heading north, and did not look in the rearview mirror. 2 miles past Ruth's house, I pulled onto a fire road that cut back through the state forest and parked behind a screen of hemlocks where the truck couldn't be seen from the road. Jackson was already there, his Subaru backed in tight against the tree line, 2 thermoses of actual coffee on the hood, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. You okay? He asked when I climbed out. Ask me in 3 days, I said. He handed me a coffee. We leaned against the hood of his car and watched the morning come through the hemlocks, and neither of us said much because there wasn't much to say. The first day was the hardest. Not because anything happened, nothing happened. The woods were quiet, the county road was empty, and the 2 sheriff's units Agent Vance had positioned half a mile south of my driveway reported nothing unusual all day. Vance's team in the eastern tree line checked in every 2 hours by radio. Nothing, no vehicles, no movement. Jackson had brought a folding camp chair and a stack of briefs he needed to review. I had brought nothing useful, no book, no work, nothing to occupy my hands. I ended up walking the fire road back and forth until Jackson told me I was making him anxious. Sit down, Maxwell, he said. He's coming from Los Angeles. Even if he got on a plane Friday morning, he wouldn't be here until tonight at the earliest. I know that, I said. I sat down on a log and put my head in my hands. I keep thinking about Emily. Jackson set down his briefs. What about her? She's going to call me tomorrow morning, I said. 6:05, same as always. And I'm going to have to answer and sound like a man who's out hunting and having a perfectly normal time, and she's going to be reporting back to Grant that I'm still out of the house, and I'm going to have to pretend I don't know that. I pressed my palms against my eyes until I saw color. She's my daughter Jackson. She called me yesterday to ask if I needed anything before I left. She said, "Be safe out there, Dad. I love you." And she meant it. I know she meant it. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "People can love someone and still hurt them. Maxwell, sometimes at the same time. That's not a contradiction, it's just how people are when they're scared and making bad choices." I lifted my head. "When did you get wise?" 30 years of divorce cases, he said. You see a lot of people loving each other badly. I almost laughed. It didn't quite make it out, but it was close. Emily called Saturday morning at 6:04, 1 minute early, which told me she was anxious. "Morning, sweetheart," I said. I was standing outside in the cold, my breath making clouds in the air, Jackson's camp chair 10 feet away with my half-finished coffee balanced on the armrest. "Dad, how's it going out there?" "Cold, bitter," I said. "Got 3 inches of frost on the ground up past the ridge. Haven't seen a thing worth shooting yet, but it's good to be out." "I'm glad." Her voice was warm and genuine, and it cut me somewhere deep, because I absolutely knew that she would relay this conversation to Grant within the hour. The details, the location, the timeline. She would do it believing she was helping, believing whatever story Grant had fed her about why Maxwell's movements mattered. "You doing okay?" I asked. Yeah, I'm good." A pause. "Dad, I've been thinking, when you get back maybe I could come up for a few days. It's been a while since I've seen the property in fall." The property. She'd said the property instead of home, or the farm, or your place the way she usually did. A small thing. A tiny thing. But I was a man who had spent 40 years reading structures, knowing where the load was carried, and where the weakness lived, and that one word landed wrong. "I'd love that," I said. "We'll figure it out when I'm back." After I hung up, I stood in the cold for a long time, with frost forming on my jacket collar, and my chest aching with something I couldn't name, precisely grief, maybe, or the anticipation of grief. The particular pain of loving someone you can already see is going to disappoint you. Saturday passed. Sunday came in gray and cold, with a low sky that felt like a ceiling pressing down. At 9 in the morning, Vance's radio operator reported a black Chevrolet Suburban with California plates had been picked up on a traffic camera in Kingston, 30 miles south. 2 occupants. Jackson stood up from his camp chair. "That's them," he said. My heart rate jumped so hard, I felt it in my back teeth. I pressed one hand flat against the hood of Jackson's Subaru and made myself breathe slow and deliberate, the way Aurora had always insisted, and waited for my heart rate to find its way back down. Vance's voice came through the radio Jackson was holding. "Units confirmed 2 individuals, Holloway and Salinas, last seen heading north on Route 32. ETA to property approximately 40 minutes. All teams hold position. Repeat hold position until subjects are on the property and moving toward the target location." The target location. Under the oak. The place where I had dropped to one knee in April mud 38 years ago and asked Aurora Thornfield if she would spend her life with me. Maxwell. Jackson's hand came down on my shoulder. "You with me?" I straightened up. The cold air was sharp and clean in my lungs, and the hemlocks around us stood dark and quiet. And somewhere 30 miles south, my son-in-law was driving north in a black Suburban to dig up the life my wife had buried. "I'm with you," I said. We waited. The afternoon light dropped lower, going orange and thin through the trees. The radio crackled every 15 minutes, units in position, no movement yet holding, and every 15 minutes I breathed again and held my hands still and thought about Aurora walking over to Ruth's house in her garden boots. At 11:47 that night, the radio came alive. Its subjects have entered the property, moving on foot toward the rear pasture. All teams, this is a go. Jackson looked at me. I picked up my flashlight and my jacket and walked out of the tree line into the dark. Before I revealed the moment Grant realized he had been caught, drop the number 11 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. You've come this far. Don't stop now. Note some elements of this story were shaped by fiction to serve the larger truth being told. If you're not comfortable with that, this is your moment to step away, no hard feelings at all. The back pasture at midnight was a different world entirely. No moon, just the hard scatter of stars above the Catskills and the faint ambient glow of the county road half a mile west, too distant to be useful. The frost had come down heavy in the 3 hours we'd been waiting, and it crunched under my boots with every step, each footfall sounding enormous in the quiet. I moved as carefully as I could. Jackson was 10 feet to my left, matching my pace, his breath coming in small white clouds that dissolved almost immediately in the cold air. Ahead of us, 2 flashlight beams moved through the darkness. Grant and Victor Salinas were not being careful. They were moving fast, purposeful, the way men move when they believe they are alone and unobserved. The particular carelessness of people who think they've already won. Victor was broader than I'd imagined from his name in a document, with a rolling, forward-leaning walk and a duffel bag over one shoulder. Grant moved differently, straighter, quicker, his flashlight sweeping the ground ahead of him in short, efficient arcs. He knew exactly where he was going. That was the thing that hit me hardest as I watched him cross my pasture in the dark, the precision of it. He didn't sweep the light across the whole field looking for landmarks. He walked a direct line angling northeast from the equipment shed toward the back fence line, as if he had memorized the route from a map or a photograph. He knows, I thought. Someone told him exactly where the tree is. The old oak stood at the far edge of the pasture, 40 yards from the back fence, a massive silhouette against the stars, its bare October branches reaching in every direction, like a man with his arms spread wide. I had proposed to Aurora under that tree. She had buried 30 years of carefully preserved truth under its roots. Grant walked straight to it without hesitating. Victor dropped the duffel bag and unzipped it. The sound of metal on metal, a collapsible shovel being assembled, the sections clicking into place. Victor worked quickly, efficiently, the shovel biting into the frost-hardened ground with a dull rhythmic thud that carried across the pasture like a heartbeat. I stopped moving. Jackson stopped beside me. We were close enough now, 30 feet, maybe less, that I could hear. Grant breathing, could hear him say something low and impatient to Victor in the dark. "Just dig," Grant said. "It's not deep. She wouldn't have buried it deep. She was sick." My hands clenched around the flashlight so hard the casing creaked. She was sick. He'd said it like a logistical detail, like Aurora's illness had been a convenient factor in his planning. I felt something move through me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not grief, not fear, but a cold structural fury, the kind that doesn't shake or shout, but simply sets itself into place like a load-bearing beam and holds. The shovel hit metal at 22 minutes past midnight. I know the exact time because I looked at my watch when I heard it, that hollow resonant clang of steel on steel that cut through the night air like a bell. Victor said something under his breath and went to his knees, scraping at the dirt with his hands. Grant crouched beside him, his flashlight aimed down into the hole. They pulled the box free together. It was larger than the lockbox from Aurora's office, a waterproof military-grade container, the kind you could buy at any Army surplus store, olive drab with a rubber seal around the lid. Aurora had bought it at a store in Poughkeepsie in the spring of 2019, I would later learn. She had driven there alone, paid cash, driven home, and buried it under the oak the same afternoon while I was in town getting the tractor serviced. Grant set the box on the ground and reached for the latch. I turned on my flashlight. The beam hit them both full in the face. Victor threw up his arm against the light, lurching backward, nearly falling. Grant spun around, and for one fraction of a second, before the mask came back down, I saw it. Raw shock. The specific unguarded shock of a man who has been absolutely certain of something and has just discovered he was wrong. Then the mask came back. Smooth, controlled. The face of a man who had been managing difficult situations his whole adult life. "Dad." His voice was almost steady. Almost. "You were supposed to be hunting." "I lied," I said. The word landed in the dark between us and sat there. Victor was on his feet now, the shovel still in his hand, his eyes moving between me and the tree line behind me, calculating distance, calculating odds, doing the math on whether he could run. Jackson stepped forward out of the dark to my left, and Victor went very still. "Victor Salinas," Jackson said. "I'd strongly advise you to set the shovel down." Victor set the shovel down. Grant hadn't moved. He was looking at me with those careful, recalibrating eyes, the same eyes I'd seen across 100 family dinners. The same eyes that had looked at my 47 acres and seen an asset instead of a home, and I watched him decide in real time how to play this. "Maxwell," he said, and now his voice had shifted warmer, almost conciliatory, the voice he used when he wanted something. "Let's be reasonable. Whatever you think is happening here, I know exactly what's happening here," I said. "You flew across the country to dig up my dead wife's property at midnight because a dying man in Beverly Hills told you to. That's what's happening." Something flickered across Grant's face at the words, "dying man." A micro expression there and gone in less than a second. But I caught it, and Jackson caught it, and we both understood what it meant. He hadn't known we knew about Cross. "The box," I said. "Step away from it." Grant's jaw tightened. His hands were at his sides, and I watched them, specifically his hands, the way you watch the part of a structure that's most likely to fail, and I saw them close slowly into fists and then open again. "You don't know what you're getting into," he said. "The people involved in this, Maxwell, these aren't people you want to make into enemies." Aurora understood that. She understood it for 30 years. My throat went tight at her name in his mouth, at the casual way he used it like he had any right to it. Aurora understood it so well, I said, that she spent 30 years making sure that when the time came, those people would have nowhere left to hide. I took one step forward. The flashlight beam never wavered. She was smarter than all of you. She was smarter than you'll ever understand. Grant stared at me for a long moment. Then from the eastern tree line, 4 flashlight beams came on, simultaneously white and brilliant, flooding the pasture in overlapping arcs of light. From the direction of the county road came the distant rising wail of Sheriff Morrow's units, their sirens carrying clean and cold across the frost. Victor Salinas sat down heavily on the ground and put his head in his hands. Grant turned toward the approaching lights and then turned back to me, and for the first time since I'd known him, for the first time in 12 years of holidays and dinners and handshakes and the particular performance of being a son-in-law, I saw something real in his face. Not remorse, not yet, but the beginning of the understanding that it was over. "There are things you don't know," he said. His voice had gone rough at the edges. "About why I did this, about what Cross told me, about what he threatened." "Save it," I said. "There are people coming who are paid to listen to that." I bent down and picked up the box from the ground beside his feet. Aurora's box. Aurora's truth, 31 years of careful preservation. And I held it against my chest the way I'd held her note 3 days ago. And I breathed in through the nose, out through the mouth. The world can wait 30 seconds. Agent Vance reached us in under 3 minutes, moving across the frost-covered pasture with 4 agents behind her in tactical vests, their flashlight beams sweeping the ground in practiced arcs. Sheriff Morrow came from the other direction with 2 deputies, and suddenly, the back pasture of my 47-acre property, the field where I'd run cattle for 30 years, where Aurora had watched meteor showers from a lawn chair on August nights, was lit up like a crime scene, which I supposed it was. Victor Salinas was already in handcuffs, sitting on the frozen ground, with his back against the oak tree and his duffel bag open beside him. The collapsible shovel, 2 flashlights, a pair of bolt cutters, and a heavy-duty trash bag that told me exactly what he'd intended to do with Aurora's box once they found it. Grant was standing with his hands behind his back, a deputy on each side, and he was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not the smooth management face, not the careful pleasantness of a man controlling a situation. Something rawer and more cornered than that. Vance pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves, crouched beside Aurora's box, and examined it without opening it. "We'll process this at the field office," she said to no one in particular. Then she stood, looked at Grant, and said, "Mr. Holloway, you've been read your Miranda rights. You don't have to say anything. But I'd encourage you to think carefully about what the next 12 hours look like for you. Because right now, you are the only person standing between Nathaniel Cross and a federal prosecution, and that is not a comfortable place to be." Grant's jaw worked. He looked at Victor. Victor was staring at the ground, his breath coming in fast, shallow clouds and the cold air already done. "Victor's going to talk," Jackson said quietly from beside me. He wasn't addressing Grant directly, just saying it to the cold night air the way you state a weather forecast. "He has no reason not to. He's got a 2019 investigation hanging over him that the FBI never closed. Cooperation is his only play." He paused. "You should think about whether you want to be the last one to the table." Grant closed his eyes. "Open them. I want it on record," he said, "that I was threatened, that I didn't come into this voluntarily. Cross had documentation. Things about Emily's finances, about business dealings we'd done together that could be misrepresented. He said if I didn't help him, he'd make sure Emily was implicated in things she had nothing to do with." My chest seized. He'd threatened Emily. He'd held my daughter over Grant's head like a weapon. "Tell me about Cross," Vance said. Her voice was neutral, professional. She'd heard worse. "Start with how he made contact." Grant talked for 40 minutes, standing in the frost-covered pasture with his hands still behind his back and his breath making clouds in the cold air. He talked, and I listened, and with every sentence the picture got clearer and darker and more complete. 2 years ago, a letter had arrived at Grant's Los Angeles office, no return address, but with a Beverly Hills postmark. Inside was a single page unsigned that described in precise detail several business transactions Grant and Victor Salinas had conducted in 2018 that existed in a legal gray area. The letter said that documentation of these transactions had been prepared, and would be delivered to the California Department of Real Estate and the FBI simultaneously unless Grant made contact through a specific intermediary attorney named in the letter. Grant had made contact. The intermediary had connected him with Cross not in person, not by name at first. Just a voice on a phone, smooth and unhurried, a man who spoke with the confidence of someone who had been making people do things for 50 years. Cross knew about Aurora. He knew she had worked for him in 1993. He knew she had kept records. He knew she had left Los Angeles with copies of things that could in the wrong hands end everything he had built and protected across 3 decades. How did he know about the oak tree? Vance asked. Specifically, how did he know the location? Grant's face changed. Something moved across it that I hadn't expected, something that looked for just a moment almost like shame. There was a woman, he said, a home health aide. She came in to help with Aurora during the last couple of months. Cross arranged for her. Through an agency that looked legitimate, he stopped. She reported back to him. Things Aurora said when the medication was heavy, when she wasn't fully. He stopped again. When she was delirious, Vance said, flatly, clinically. Yes, Grant said. The word dropped into the night like a stone into black water. I had to turn away. I walked 4 steps to the left and stood with my back to all of them, to Grant and the deputies and the FBI agents and the lit-up crime scene my pasture had become, and I pressed both fists against my thighs and breathed and looked up at the Catskill sky until the burning behind my eyes subsided enough that I could see straight. Aurora, in her final weeks, drifting in and out on the tide of the pain medication, whispering things she didn't know she was saying, and someone in that room writing it down, sending it to the man she'd spent 30 years hiding from. The man she'd been most afraid of had been in her bedroom in the end. I turned back around. She said, "The oak," I said. My voice came out very steady, which surprised me. She said it out loud when she didn't know she was being listened to, and someone sent that to Cross, and Cross sent it to you. Grant met my eyes. Yes. And you used it, I said. You took the thing my wife said in her sleep, and you used it to come here and dig up what she spent 30 years protecting. Grant's throat moved. Maxwell, don't, I said. Don't call me that. Vance stepped between us, not physically, just with her presence, the way an experienced federal agent redirects a conversation that's about to become something other than useful. Mr. Holloway, she said, I need you to tell me about Nathaniel Cross's current situation, his health, his timeline. Grant pulled in a breath. He's dying, he said. Pancreatic cancer. His doctors told him in July that he had maybe 4 months. He's not the same man he was. He's desperate in a way that I didn't fully understand when I got into this. His voice had gone quieter, stripped of the management tone entirely. He told me the documents were the last loose end, that if they were destroyed, everything else he'd done would die with him. No trail, no evidence, no case. He said he just wanted to die clean. What did he offer you? Jackson asked. Money, a percentage of assets he was going to liquidate before the end. Grant's mouth twisted. I believed him. For a long time I believed him. But 3 weeks ago, his attorney stopped returning my calls, and I realized that you were the loose end, Vance said. Grant looked at her. Something in his face collapsed, not dramatically, just a slow subsidence like a wall that had been holding pressure for too long. He wasn't going to pay me. He was going to let me take the criminal exposure and then cut contact. I'd be the one who broke into a property and stole documents. He'd be a dying old man in Beverly Hills who didn't know anything about it. But you came anyway, I said. Grant looked at me. I needed the money, Maxwell. Emily doesn't know how bad the finances are. I made decisions in 2020 and 2021 that he stopped. I was desperate. I convinced myself that once I had the box, I could negotiate from a position of strength. That Cross would have to pay me to hand it over. Or you could have walked away, I said. Grant had no answer for that. Vance nodded to the deputies. Take him in. I want both of them processed tonight. She turned to me. Mr. Thornfield, we'll need your formal statement tomorrow morning. Can you come into Woodstock? Yes, I said. She picked up Aurora's box from the ground where she'd set it, held it with both hands and looked at it for a moment, the dented olive-drab container, the rubber seal gray with age and soil. Your wife was extraordinary, Vance said quietly. I want you to know that. In 21 years with the Bureau, I have never seen a civilian build and preserve a case like the one she built. What's in this box is going to matter. It's already mattering. I watched them lead Grant across the frost-bright pasture toward the county road, his shoulders forward and his head down. And I thought about all the Christmases and Thanksgivings and phone calls and handshakes, and I felt the grief of it not for Grant, but for Emily, who was asleep right now in Los Angeles, and did not yet know that her life had just changed completely. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. I already knew who it was before I looked. Emily. A text, not a call. 3 words sent at 12:51 in the morning, California time. Dad, call me. Jackson drove me home. I didn't argue. My hands were steady enough on the outside, but inside something had gone loose and unmoored the way a dock feels after a heavy boat pulls away too fast. And I was not confident I should be operating machinery in the dark at 1 in the morning after the night I'd just had. We didn't talk much on the drive. The county road was empty and black, the headlights carving a yellow tunnel through the dark, and I sat in the passenger seat with Aurora's box on my lap and my hand flat on top of it the way you'd keep a hand on a sleeping child. "You want company?" Jackson asked when he pulled into my driveway. "No," I said, "but thank you." He nodded. "Call me if you need anything. Doesn't matter what time." I went inside, turned on the kitchen light, set the box on the table, and put the kettle on. Some situations require coffee. Some require something stronger. This one required tea, the particular brand of chamomile Aurora had kept in the blue tin on the second shelf, the tin I hadn't opened since she died, because opening it felt like using something up that couldn't be replaced. I opened it. The smell hit me so hard, my eyes filled immediately chamomile, and something faintly floral underneath, exactly the smell of every quiet evening she and I had ever spent at this table. I stood over the kettle and let myself feel it for 30 seconds. And then I wiped my face with the back of my hand and sat down. I opened the box. The contents were sealed in individual plastic bags. Aurora's doing careful and methodical to the end. 4 cassette tapes in a Ziploc, each labeled in her handwriting, with a date and a name. A manila envelope containing what appeared to be 40 or 50 pages of photocopied financial records. The numbers dense and precise in the way of documents that had been prepared by someone who knew exactly what they proved. A smaller envelope holding a USB drive with a strip of white tape on it that said simply, "Digital Backup 2019. And at the bottom, wrapped in a second plastic bag, a white business envelope. For the FBI Attention Special Agent Diane Vance Manhattan Field Office. In the event of my death, please open. Aurora M. Thornfield. I held it in both hands for a long time. She had addressed it by name. She had known exactly who to send it to. She had sat in a coffee shop on Tinker Street with Vance 14 months ago and made sure that even if everything else failed, even if I never found the box, even if Grant got there first, there was a name on an envelope that would eventually reach the right hands. She had covered every possibility. I set the envelope aside for Vance and called her directly. She answered on the second ring, which told me she hadn't slept either. "The box is open," I said. "There's an envelope addressed to you, sealed, her handwriting." A pause brief, but I heard something in it. "I'll be there at 7, Vance said. "Don't open it." "I wasn't going to," I said. After I hung up, I sat with the cassette tapes and the financial records spread out in front of me under the kitchen light, and I thought about a 29-year-old woman in Los Angeles in 1993 who had been very good with numbers and very alone with what those numbers told her. "I am not brave," she had written, "but I am very good with numbers. And the numbers don't lie." She had been brave. She just hadn't known it yet. My phone was still in my jacket pocket. I took it out and looked at Emily's message, "Dad, call me," sent at 12:51 in the morning, her time, which meant she'd been awake, which meant Grant had called her before the deputies had his phone. I dialed. She picked up before the first ring finished, which meant she'd been holding the phone. "Dad." Her voice cracked open on the single-syllable raw and wrecked in a way I hadn't heard since her mother's funeral. "Dad, Grant called me. He said he was arrested. He said the FBI—" She stopped, drew a breath that shuddered all the way down. "Dad, what's happening? What did he do? What did he do to you?" My chest ached so badly I had to press my fist against it. "Emily," I said, "I need you to listen to me carefully. Are you somewhere you can sit down?" "I'm already sitting." Her voice was barely a voice. "Dad, please, tell me." "I will," I said. "I'm going to tell you everything. But first, I need to know, are you okay? Right now in this moment, are you physically okay?" She made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, broken and exhausted. "No," she whispered. I am not okay, but I'm here. I'm listening. Good, I said, and I began. She looked smaller than I remembered. That was the first thing I noticed when I saw her come through the arrivals door at Albany International. Not the red eyes, not the way she was gripping the handle of her carry-on, so hard her knuckles had gone white. Not the fact that she was wearing what appeared to be the same clothes she'd had on when Grant called her at 1 in the morning. Just that she looked smaller, like something structural inside her had given way, and the rest of her was compensating, holding itself up through pure stubbornness. She saw me, and her face crumpled. She crossed the arrivals hall in 12 steps and walked straight into my arms, and I held her the way I'd held her when she was 7 years old and had fallen off her bicycle on the gravel driveway, hard and tight with both arms. Her face pressed against my shoulder, her whole body shaking with the force of crying that had been dammed up since 1 in the morning and was now coming out, whether she wanted it to or not. "Dad," she said into my jacket. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." "I've got you," I said. That was all. Just, "I've got you." We stood there in the middle of the Albany Airport arrivals hall for a long time, with people moving around us on both sides, and I held my daughter and felt her shake and said nothing else, because there was nothing else that needed saying yet. The drive back to the Catskills took 40 minutes. Emily sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the window, watching the October landscape move past the orange and red of the sugar maples. The dark green of the hemlock stands the Catskill ridgeline, rising ahead of us against a pale afternoon sky. "Agent Vance came this morning," I said when we were 10 minutes from the property. She took the box. She said the financial records alone are enough to support the prosecution. The cassette tapes will go through forensic audio analysis. That's a process where FBI technicians verify the recordings are authentic and haven't been altered. But Vance said, combined with Victor Salinas' cooperation, the case against Cross is solid. Emily turned from the window. "What about me?" Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. They'd tightened in her lap until the knuckles stood out. "The documents with my signature." "Jackson confirmed it this morning," I said. "Fraud in the inducement. Under New York law, when someone is deceived into signing a document through deliberate misrepresentation of its contents, the signature is legally void. You have no liability." I paused. "You're not in trouble, Emily. Not legally." She exhaled a long, shaking breath that emptied her completely. "Okay," she said. "Okay." And then very quietly, "That's not actually what I was most afraid of." I glanced at her. "I was most afraid," she said, "that you'd never want to speak to me again." I kept my eyes on the road and my hands on the wheel, and I let that sit between us for the length of a curve and a straightaway, because it deserved to be sat with. "That's not something you need to be afraid of," I said finally. I'd set the kitchen table before I left for the airport, Jackson's folder of documents on one side, Aurora's sealed letter to Emily on the other, and a pot of coffee, keeping warm on the stove. Emily sat down, and I poured 2 cups and sat across from her, and she looked at the folder and then at the envelope with her name in her mother's handwriting, and she pressed her fingers to her mouth. "Mom wrote that," she asked. "Before she went into the hospital the last time," I said. "She left it in the box." Emily reached for the envelope with both hands. They were trembling so badly that she had trouble getting her finger under the flap, and she made a small, frustrated sound and pressed her hands flat on the table for a moment, breathing deliberately before trying again. The letter was 3 pages handwritten, Aurora's careful round cursive covering both sides of each page. I looked away while Emily read it, looked out the kitchen window at the back pasture at the old oak, standing at the far edge in the afternoon light, its root system disturbed now by shovels and boots, and the particular violence of being sought out in the dark. The sound Emily made when she reached the end of the letter was not crying exactly. It was something smaller and more broken than that, a single compressed sound, like a person who has been punched somewhere soft and unexpected, the air going out of them all at once. "She knew," Emily said. Her voice was wrecked. "She knew about Grant. She saw it. She saw exactly what he was, and she tried to protect me from knowing, and she stopped. Pressed the letter against her chest with both hands, eyes squeezed shut, tears running freely down her face and dropping off her jaw onto the kitchen table. She was dying, and she was still trying to protect me. She was still trying to protect everybody. "That was your mother," I said. My own voice had gone rough. "Right up to the end." Emily opened her eyes. She looked at me across the table, really looked the way people look when they're about to say something they've been building up to for a long time. "Dad," she said. I need to tell you something about what I knew, about what I chose not to know. She set the letter down, carefully smoothed it with her palm. And I need you to hear it even if it makes you angry, especially if it makes you angry. My hands wrapped around my coffee mug. The ceramic was warm against my palms. Outside, the afternoon light was going gold over the Catskills, the same light that had come through this window every October for 34 years. The same light Aurora had sat in every morning with her own cup of coffee and the newspaper and the particular contentment of a woman who had chosen her life deliberately and loved it fiercely. Tell me, I said. Emily set her coffee mug down with both hands carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely reliable. 18 months ago, she said, Grant came home late, later than usual, and he'd been on the phone in the car. I could see him through the kitchen window, still sitting in the driveway, still talking. When he came inside, he was distracted, quiet in the way he got when he was working something out. She paused, smoothed the letter on the table in front of her again, the same gesture she'd been making for 5 minutes, her palm moving over her mother's handwriting like she was trying to read it through her skin. I heard him say 2 things before he saw me in the doorway and ended the call. The first was Aurora's documents. The second was the ranch. She looked up at me. Her eyes were red and swollen and utterly steady. He never called it the ranch, Dad. He always called it your property or the farm. Ranch was someone else's word. Someone who didn't know us. My hands tightened around my mug. I asked him about it, Emily continued. Right there in the kitchen, I said, "Who were you talking to about my mother's documents?" And she stopped, her jaw tightened. He was so calm. He's always so calm. He said it was a legal matter, something to do with property records from before you and Mom moved to New York. He said there might be some old paperwork that needed to be cleared up before I could inherit cleanly. He said he was handling it. He said he didn't want me to worry. She said the last sentence with a particular flatness that told me she understood now the full weight of those words. I didn't want you to worry. Aurora had said the same thing to Ruth, standing at her door in her garden boots. The same words used for entirely different reasons by entirely different people. One of them out of love. One of them out of calculation. Did you believe him? I asked. Emily's chin trembled. She pressed her lips together hard before she answered. I believed him enough, she said. That's the honest answer, Dad. I didn't fully believe him. Something about it felt wrong, the way he ended the call when he saw me, the way he was too smooth about the explanation, too ready with it. I've been married to him for 12 years. I know when he's managing me. Her voice cracked on the last 2 words, and she pushed through it. But I made a choice. I told myself it was probably nothing, that Grant was the kind of person who handled things, that if there was something I needed to know, he would tell me. She picked up her coffee mug and put it down again without drinking. I chose not to dig deeper, she said, and I am going to have to live with that. I know that. I'm not here asking you to tell me it wasn't my fault, because it was partly. My silence made it easier for him. My not asking made me easier to use. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. He used me and I let him, because I was afraid of what I would find if I looked. The kitchen clock ticked on the wall. Outside, the afternoon had gone fully gold, now the light thick and syrupy through the window, catching the dust motes in the air and turning them briefly brilliant. I stood up from the table. I walked to the kitchen window and stood there with my back to Emily, looking out at the back pasture, at the old oak, standing in the long October light, its disturbed earth dark against the frost-pale grass around it. Aurora had been afraid too. She had been afraid of what would happen if she told me, afraid of what I would do, afraid of the chain of consequences that the truth would set in motion. She had made choices based on that, fear choices that had kept a secret buried for 30 years, choices that had left her carrying something enormous and heavy, completely alone. Fear made people smaller than they were. It made them choose the path that felt safest in the moment, even when they knew somewhere underneath that the path led somewhere bad. I understood that. God help me, I understood it completely. I turned around. Emily was watching me with the expression of someone waiting for a verdict, not from a judge, but from the one person whose opinion of her actually mattered, which was in some ways much harder to face. Your mother was afraid too, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She was afraid to tell me about Cross, afraid to tell you about Grant. She made choices based on that fear, and those choices had consequences she didn't intend. I came back to the table and sat down. I spent about 4 hours last week being furious at her for it, for not telling me, for carrying all of it alone for 30 years and leaving me to find out like this. Emily's eyes filled. And then I remembered what she wrote about herself in that notebook, I said. She said she wasn't brave. She was wrong about that. I looked at my daughter across the table, at her red eyes and her shaking hands, and the 12 years of a marriage she was going to have to rebuild her entire life around the absence of. She was one of the bravest people I have ever known. She just did her bravery quietly, in ways nobody could see. Emily pressed her fist against her mouth. A sound came out of her anyway, fractured and helpless, the sound of someone trying very hard not to completely fall apart. You made a bad choice, I said. You made it because you were scared, and because it felt easier than the alternative. That doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who made a bad choice. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I don't know if I can tell you I forgive you yet, Emily. I think that's going to take some time. But I can tell you that I am not going to lose you the way I lost your mother, with things unsaid between us that should have been said. She turned her hand over and gripped mine so hard it hurt. I'm going to fix this, she said fiercely through tears that were coming freely now, streaming down her face and dripping off her jaw. Whatever the FBI needs, whatever Jackson needs, whatever you need, I am going to spend the rest of my life making this right. I swear to you, Dad. I swear it. I squeezed her hand. I know you will, I said. You're your mother's daughter. Fixing things quietly is in your blood. She let out a sound that was somehow both a sob and a laugh, broken and real, and utterly hers, and she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against our joined hands and cried, the way people cry when the worst of the holding it together is finally mercifully over. I sat with her and let her cry and looked out the window at the old oak in the long October light. And I thought about Aurora walking to Ruth's house in her garden boots on the last morning of her life, pressing a folded piece of paper into a neighbor's hand. If anything happens to me, give this to Maxwell. He'll know what it means. She had known I would find my way to it. She had trusted me to follow the trail she'd left, to open the box to do what needed doing. I had not let her down. And I did not intend to let her daughter down either. 3 weeks after the night under the oak tree, I sat in Jackson's conference room with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago and listened to Agent Vance tell me how it was going to end. She looked different in daylight than she had in the frost-bright pasture at midnight. Not softer exactly, but more human, the fluorescent light catching the tiredness around her eyes that the cold and the adrenaline had hidden before. She had a legal pad in front of her covered in handwriting and a manila folder thick enough to use as a doorstop. Grant Holloway was arraigned Monday morning in federal court in Manhattan, she said. 3 counts, wire fraud, forgery of a public document, and conspiracy to commit property fraud. The U.S. Attorney's Office has filed a motion to remand him without bail on the grounds that he has significant assets in California and demonstrated willingness to travel across state lines to commit the offenses. She looked at me steadily. The judge agreed. He's in custody. Something shifted in my chest when she said that. Not satisfaction exactly. More like the feeling when a load-bearing wall finally gets the support. It's been needing a settling, a rightness, the structure finding its proper alignment. Victor Salinas entered a cooperation agreement yesterday. Vance continued. He's providing full testimony in exchange for a reduced charge on the conspiracy count. His 2019 investigation has been formally reopened. She paused. He told us things about Cross's operation that we didn't have before. Names, accounts, transactions going back to the early 90s. Your wife's records filled in the financial architecture. Victor filled in the human one. And Cross? I asked. Vance set down her pen. Nathaniel Cross was taken into federal custody at his Beverly Hills residence 11 days ago. Given his medical condition, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, currently receiving palliative care, the court agreed to house arrest with electronic monitoring. His passport has been surrendered. He cannot leave California. Her voice carried no particular satisfaction or disappointment, just facts delivered with the precision of someone who had learned to let the law be what it was. His attorneys are filing motions. They'll file motions until he dies, probably. But the evidence your wife preserved is going to outlast every motion they file. I thought about Nathaniel Cross in a Beverly Hills house with an ankle monitor and 4 months left to live. The evidence he'd spent 30 years trying to destroy now in the hands of the federal government. I tried to feel something about that triumph relief, the particular satisfaction of justice arriving even late. Mostly I just felt tired. "Emily," I said. Vance's expression shifted not much, but enough. "Emily Thornfield Holloway has been fully cooperative with the investigation. She provided a voluntary statement, turned over all communications between herself and Grant going back 18 months, and agreed to testify before the grand jury, if called." She met my eyes. "The U.S. Attorney has confirmed she will not be charged. Her cooperation has been noted formally in the case file." I exhaled, slowly and completely, the way I hadn't been able to exhale since the night Emily had sat across my kitchen table and told me what she'd chosen not to know. "There's one more thing," Vance said. She opened the manila folder and slid a single page across the table. A letter on FBI letterhead, addressed to Aurora M. Thornfield, dated 3 weeks ago. "We can't deliver this to her, but I wanted you to have it." I picked it up. It was a formal letter of acknowledgement from the U.S. Attorney's Office confirming receipt of Aurora's evidence package and its role in the federal prosecution of Nathaniel Cross. 3 paragraphs of careful legal language, and then at the bottom, a handwritten note in Vance's precise script: "Mrs. Thornfield, you did this right. You kept it safe for 30 years, and you made sure it reached the right hands. The case is built. It's going to hold. Thank you." My throat locked up so completely that I couldn't speak for a moment. I set the letter down on the table and pressed both palms flat against it and breathed. Jackson, sitting beside me, put his hand briefly on my shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly right. "She earned that," I finally managed. "She did," Vance said simply. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my jacket pocket against my chest. On the drive home, I pulled over once on the county road, just for a minute, engine running, both hands on the wheel, and let myself feel the full weight of it. 31 years. A 29-year-old woman alone in Los Angeles with numbers that told a story no one wanted told. Making a choice that would cost her 3 decades of silence and ultimately everything she had left. She had paid an enormous price. And the thing she'd bought with it was sitting in a federal case file in Manhattan, building toward a conviction that would outlast the man she'd been afraid of for her entire adult life. I pulled back onto the road and drove home through the November trees, their branches bare now, the Catskills gray and still around me. Not me, she had written. I just didn't know how much she was carrying alone. I knew now. The new barn went up in September. I hired a crew from town for the framing 3 men who worked fast and clean and didn't ask too many questions, which was exactly what I needed, and did the finish carpentry myself. The way I'd always done things that mattered. The smell of fresh lumber was the best thing I'd encountered in a year. Something about it cut straight through everything else, bypassed whatever had gone thick and complicated in my chest, and just smelled like work, like the possibility of building something that would last. Ruth came over the morning. We finished the roof, carrying a pot of chicken soup big enough to feed the whole crew. "Aurora would have baked a pie," she said, setting it on the tailgate of my truck. "Aurora would have baked 3 pies, I said, and then criticized the rafters. Ruth laughed, a real one, full and unguarded, and I realized it was the first time I'd heard her laugh since before the funeral. We stood there in the October sunshine, eating soup out of paper bowls and looking at the new barn, and it was not the same as the old barn, and it was not supposed to be, and that was all right. I had replanted the north fence line. I had reshingled the equipment shed. I had fixed the back porch steps that I'd been meaning to fix since 2019. The oak tree I left entirely alone. I didn't clean up the disturbed earth around its roots right away. I let the frost and the rain work on it through October, and November let the ground settle back into itself, naturally, the way ground does when you give it time. By December, it was nearly invisible, just a slight unevenness in the soil, the kind of thing you'd only notice if you were looking for it. In January, I built the bench. White oak lumber, because it seemed right. Mortise and tenon joints, no hardware. The wood fitted together the way good wood fits, snug and permanent, the grain running continuous across the joints. Low enough to sit comfortably, wide enough to share. I set it against the base of the old oak on a Saturday afternoon, in 20-degree weather, my breath coming in, clouds my hands so cold I could barely feel the mallet. I sat on it when I was done. The Catskills were silver and white in every direction, the sky pale and enormous above the bare branches. A woodpecker was working somewhere in the tree line to the east. The cold was the kind of cold that clarified things, that stripped away everything unnecessary and left only what was real. This was real, the bench, the tree, the ground, where you proposed to me, Aurora had written. I had dropped to one knee here on an April evening in 1986 with mud on my work boots and a ring I'd saved 11 months to buy, and she had laughed so hard she'd cried, and then she'd said yes. She had buried the most important thing she'd ever kept safe in the same ground. I thought that was probably not an accident. Emily came up the first weekend of October. She drove herself, this time rented a car at Albany, made the 40-minute drive alone, pulled into the driveway at noon on a Saturday with a bag of groceries and the particular, careful brightness of a person who was working hard at something and making genuine progress. She looked better. Not healed healing doesn't work that fast, and Emily was doing the real work of it, the kind that involved lawyers and therapists and a one-bedroom apartment in Silver Lake she'd moved into in February. But better, steadier, more herself than she'd been in years, she told me, which I believed. We spent the afternoon doing not very much. I showed her the new barn. She ran her hand along the finished carpentry and said, "This is beautiful, Dad," with such simple sincerity that my throat tightened. We walked the fence line. We checked on the 3 new calves I'd bought in August. Late afternoon, we ended up at the oak tree, standing in front of the bench without quite planning to. Emily looked at it for a long time. Then she sat down. I sat beside her. The sun was going down behind the Catskill Ridge, painting the sky in layers of orange and rose and the particular deep blue that comes just before dark. The air smelled of wood smoke and cold grass and the faint sweetness of the last fallen apples in the orchard. "I've been thinking about her a lot," Emily said. "Not the way I used to, not just missing her, actually thinking about who she was, what she was dealing with." "What do you think?" I asked. Emily was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet of someone avoiding something, but the considered quiet of someone choosing words carefully. "I think she was braver than she knew," she said. "And I think she was lonelier than she let on." She paused. "I want to be more like the first part. I'm working on not repeating the second." My chest ached with how much I loved her in that moment. Not the uncomplicated love of before something harder won, and therefore more durable. "Dad," she said softly, "are you okay? Like, actually okay?" I looked at the bench under the oak tree at the last light on the mountains, at my daughter sitting beside me, with her hands folded in her lap and her face turned toward the sky. "Getting there," I said. "Every day, a little more." She leaned her head against my shoulder. We sat there until the stars came out. The phone rang at 6:05. I was already awake. I was always already awake at 6:05. 70 years of early mornings had wired that into me at a level deeper than habit, deeper than choice, something cellular and permanent. I was sitting in the kitchen with my first cup of coffee, watching the October fog come down off the Catskills, the same way it came down every October morning, slow and gray, and absolute, swallowing the tree line one branch at a time. Aurora would have loved this morning. She always said fall in upstate New York was God showing off. I looked at the phone screen. Emily. I thought about the first time I'd seen her name on that screen, at 6:05 in the morning, the tightening in my stomach, the careful way I'd brace myself before answering the questions I'd known were coming, before she asked them. "Are you going hunting today? Are you going alone? How long will you be gone? Does anyone know where you are?" I picked up on the first ring. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Dad?" Her voice was warm and unhurried, carrying the particular ease of someone who has recently remembered how to sleep. "How are you this morning? Not are you going hunting, not are you leaving the property, not will anyone know where you are. Just how are you?" "I'm good," I said, and meant it in a way I hadn't meant it in a long time. "Coffee's on Fogs coming in off the ridge. 3 of the calves got into the south pasture overnight, and I've got to go round them up before they eat through the fence line again." Emily laughed, the real laugh, the one that sounded like her mother's. "Classic. Do you need help?" "I've been rounding up cattle by myself since before you were born, Em." "That's not a no." "It's a very strong no," I said, "but I appreciate the offer." She laughed again, and we talked for 20 minutes about nothing important and everything real about the calves and the fence and the first frost coming next week, about a book she'd been reading about, a trail she'd hiked near Silver Lake the previous weekend, that had views she said reminded her of the Catskills, small things, ordinary things. The kind of things that constitute a life when you're not in the middle of a crisis, when the emergency is over, and what's left is just the actual texture of being alive and in contact with people you love. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad, I've been thinking about Thanksgiving. Would it be okay if I came up? I could come Wednesday, stay through the weekend." My chest did something complicated and warm. I'd like that very much, I said. Good. A pause, not the calculated pause I'd learned to dread, just the natural pause of someone finishing a thought. I love you, Dad. I love you too, Em. After the line went quiet, I sat with the phone on the table and my coffee in both hands and listened to the house around me, the refrigerator humming, the wind moving through the old oak, outside the particular silence of a building that has been lived in for a long time by people who loved each other inside it. It was a good silence, the right kind. I rinsed my mug, pulled on my jacket and my work boots, and went outside. The morning was cold, and still the fog so thick I could only see 30 yards in any direction. The rest of the world dissolved into soft gray nothing. My breath made clouds. The frost crunched under my boots with every step across the back pasture, the same frost crunch I'd been walking through for 34 years. On this land, the sound of it as familiar as my own name. I rounded up the calves, first found them exactly where I'd known they'd be at the southwest corner, where the fence post had been leaning, since August 3 of them, looking at me with the particular expression of cattle who know they've done something wrong and have calculated that it was worth it anyway. I herded them back through the gate, restrung the wire, made a note to replace the post before winter. Then I walked to the oak tree. The bench was wet with dew, the white oak wood dark with it. I wiped it down with my sleeve and sat down my back against the trunk, the fog pressing in on all sides. The Catskills were invisible this morning, just presence without form, the mountains implied by the shape of the fog above them. I sat there for a long time, without doing anything. There was a particular quality to the quiet under the oak that I had come to recognize over the past year, not emptiness, not absence, but something more like the quiet of a room where someone you love has recently been, a warmth that had outlasted the source of it. I couldn't explain it better than that, and I'd stopped trying. I put my hand on the rough bark of the trunk. I've been thinking about what I want to say to you. I said to the fog and the morning and the 34 years of living I'd done on this piece of ground. I've been thinking about it for a while now. A woodpecker started up somewhere in the tree line to the east, the same one I'd been hearing since January, working at the same dead elm with the same determined persistence. You should have told me, I said. I want to start there because it's true, and I think you knew it was true, and I think you made a choice anyway, and I'm not going to pretend that choice didn't cost us both something. My throat tightened but didn't close. I would have been afraid too. I understand that now. I understand it better than I did a year ago, better than I did the night I found the notebook. I pressed my palm flat against the bark. You were 29 years old, and you were alone with something enormous, and you made the best decision you knew how to make with what you had. And then you spent 30 years making sure it would be all right in the end. The fog shifted slightly above me, a slow movement of gray against gray. It's all right, I said. In the end, Aurora, it's all right. Emily is going to be okay. She's doing the work. She's got your stubbornness and your patience, and God help her your tendency to carry things alone, but she's learning. We both are. My voice went rough at the edges, and I let it because there was no one here who needed me to hold it together. The evidence is where it belongs. Cross is running out of time to outrun it. And I'm sitting on a bench I built myself under the tree where I asked you to marry me, and the fog is coming off the Catskills, and it's October. And you were right, fall up here is God showing off. I sat for a while longer with my hand on the bark, and the woodpecker working in the east, and the fog doing what fog does, burning slowly off as the morning warmed the tree line, coming back into view, one dark shape at a time, and then the ridge beyond it, and then finally the pale blue sky above the ridge, enormous and clear and cold and permanent. I forgive you, I said. I want you to know that. Wherever you are, whatever that means, I forgive you. And I'm grateful. Every single day, I'm grateful. I sat there until the fog was gone, and the morning was fully itself, bright and cold and ordinary and entirely real. Then I stood up, brushed the dew off my jacket, and walked back across the pasture toward the house. There were calves to check on, a fence post to order, Thanksgiving to prepare for, a life to get back to. Looking back on this family story, I keep returning to one truth. The people we love most are sometimes carrying things we cannot see. Aurora carried her secret for 31 years out of fear. I carried my grief alone for almost a year out of habit. Emily carried her doubt in silence because she was afraid of the answer. We were a family of people protecting each other so carefully that we forgot to actually reach each other. God doesn't waste our pain. He uses it to strip away what isn't real and leave only what is. This family story taught me that silence is not the same as protection. Family betrayal hurts most, not because of what was done, but because of what was never said. If you're holding something heavy right now, carrying it alone because you don't want anyone to worry, don't do what I did. Tell someone you trust today. Family betrayal doesn't have to be the final chapter. What we build in the wreckage matters more than the wreckage itself. If this story touched you, drop a comment below, share what it made you feel. Pass it along to someone who needs to hear that forgiveness is still possible. And subscribe to the channel, there are more stories coming that I think you'll want to hear. Thank you for staying until the very end, truly. A note, some stories on this channel include fictional elements built for reflection and meaning. If that's not for you, no hard feelings. But if you're still here, I'm grateful you are.